Hello, welcome everyone. I think everyone has now entered the room. Thank you so much for joining us today for this event, Fasting for Justice. My name is Rachel Small. I'm the Canada organizer with World Beyond War. World Beyond War is a global grassroots network of volunteers, activists, and allied organizations in 189 countries, all advocating for the abolition of war and its replacement with a just and sustainable peace. I want to thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. Thrilled to be in the company of audience members and speakers from across Canada, across Turtle Island, and actually all around the world. This webinar today is being hosted as well by Voice of Women for Peace, Pax Christi Toronto, the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, and Climate Fast. We are live streaming right now to the World Beyond War Facebook page. Welcome to everyone who's joining us there on the live stream. For those who didn't register in time, or if you'd like to share this webinar with others afterwards, please direct them there. So let's get started. Today I'm speaking with you all from Tikaranto on Dish with One Spoon in Treaty 13 Indigenous territory. And I imagine the vast majority of us right now, spread out as we are where we are joining this webinar from land that was stolen and continues to be stolen. Here, the foundational war of this country, Canada, is of course one of colonization, and that violence continues to this day and is deeply relevant to our discussion here today. We're going to be discussing resistance to war, to bomber planes, to the climate crisis. We'll be discussing movements for prisoner and migrant justice and broader movements for racial justice. These are all issues that impact Indigenous people first and often worst, and that Indigenous people are also leading absolutely at the front lines of struggle of these resistance movements. This event is fundamentally about resistance. This event came to be as many of us involved in the movement to stop Canada from purchasing 88 new fighter jets really thought about how do we broaden our work, how do we deepen our work, how do we build the kind of movement that will actually stop the Canadian state from buying these planes whose sole purpose is to bomb people around the world. And as we began to develop a campaign that involved a fast and a hunger strike, we thought that we would bring us all together today to really learn about the history, the ongoing practice, and those who have led this powerful version of tactic for nonviolent resistance. So this event is quite unique, and it's really twofold. We're going to be hearing from some amazing speakers who have themselves participated and supported in fasts and hunger strikes. And we're also going to be making the exciting announcement of a new fast that will be happening in April across Canada to actively stop the purchase of bomber planes. But more on that later. For now, it's my pleasure to pass the mic over to Bianca Mujeni of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. Thanks, Bianca.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much for your introduction. It's kind of amazing to be here at this event with so many incredible anti-war, anti-violence activists who've taken such impactful action for peace. And I have the great pleasure of introducing our first speaker. Our first speaker is Matthew Behrens. Matthew is a writer and coordinator of Homes Not Bombs, a nonviolent direct action network that seeks to transform institutional and interpersonal violence through education, organizing, training, and creative approaches to resistance. He's worked on a diverse series of issues in both the US and Canada, from anti-draft, apartheid divestment, anti-nuclear, and Latin America solidarity work, to accompaniment and solidarity campaigns in solidarity with Indigenous land water defenders, women criminalized for defending themselves against male violence, racialized people jailed under state security pretexts, and refugees needing sanctuary from the danger of deportation. Homes Not Bombs also works to transform Canada's wartime economy, which is $32 billion annually, into one dedicated to meeting people's and the planet's needs. Welcome, Matthew.
Unmute. There we go. Okay, thank you. Bianca, are you introducing everyone at the same time, or are we just jumping right in?
Yeah, you can jump right in. I'm going to introduce you each before you speak. So
got it. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, anyway, it's a great pleasure to be here with this fantastic panel and with so many. I'm seeing a lot of great names of people who've joined this event. I'm currently coming to you from unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory. And it's incredibly appropriate, I think, that we are having a discussion about chain fasting, hunger strikes in the context of militarism, because militarism represents such a massive theft from the poor and from those who actually do hunger, not only hunger for justice, but actually hunger. We live, many of us who are on this Zoom call, in a nation called Canada, where, as mentioned, we spend $32 billion a year on war, and yet there are hundreds of thousands of people who are still homeless. Millions are turned away from food banks, and yet this country is planning to spend upwards of $80 billion on bombers and $210 billion on warships. So how do we approach this idea of hunger striking, of fasting? And for me, it's something that's always been a part of my life, based on a lot of the people who have introduced me to and mentored me in nonviolent action. People like Dorothy Day and Barbara Deming and David Dellinger and Cesar Chavez. These are all figures that people know because they themselves have undertaken fasts to protest a wide variety of issues. Now, we're also in an age where people like myself have learned a lot about body awareness. And so fasting is something which needs to take into consideration our very complicated relationships with food and bodily autonomy. And so that's something that, as we look at fasting, I think we've learned a lot from the body shaming movement, from body positivity movements, about how we can actually approach this issue. Part of the nonviolent tradition, I don't think it's news to anyone, is about our willingness to take risk and to take on suffering without inflicting violence on someone else. When we are undertaking a hunger fast, what we're trying to do is appeal to the conscience of either a sleeping nation or to someone who is divided from that best part of themselves. And so as they see perhaps us risking suffering, going through a difficult period, it's our hope that we can touch that part of them, which is inherent, I think, to all of us, that we as human beings are good and we are empathetic and that we have a conscience. Suffragettes, we're on the 100th anniversary of women getting the vote and the suffrage movement. So there's renewed focus on that era when a lot of women went to jail, especially in Great Britain, and went on lengthy hunger strikes. They were force-fed. Incredible violence. And in fact, some of the first medical documentation of force feeding took place during the suffragette movement, when the British medical journal The Lancet produced a report which kind of sat on a shelf for many years. And it wasn't really until the force feeding that we saw at Guantanamo Bay almost a century later that some of that medical research started came back. But the power of the fast was so great that the British Parliament actually passed something called the Cat and Mouse Act, which was designed to try and release those who were on hunger strikes so that no one died on the British government's watch. And that if someone did die, hopefully, they would die outside of prison, so the British government would say it's not our responsibility. So there's a great deal of power in refusing to eat. One of the longest hunger strikes currently ongoing has lasted over 3,000 days, and that is at Guantanamo Bay, where a gentleman by the name of Ahmed Rabbani has been on hunger strike for a long time. He went into prison at about 170 pounds, and he's currently at about 80 pounds. So when he looks at this, he says, basically, his whole life is force feeding at this point. But he says, my goal is to get out of here. And with all that weight that I've lost, about 53% of me has escaped. So especially for prisoners, when you are in prison and every single bit of your life is controlled, whether we're talking about a physical prison or an economic system where every piece of your life is controlled, the ability to take back some form of bodily autonomy is really critical and very empowering. I'd just like to, I know we don't have a lot of time, but talk about a couple of hunger strikes that I've been involved in here in the land known as Canada that relate to events that took place after September the 11th, 2001, when numerous Muslim men were thrown into solitary confinement for years on end, and they were held as terror threats based on secret allegations that they were not allowed to contest. One of the gentlemen that I worked very closely with, named by Hassan Almri, he went on a 43-day hunger strike in 2003 because they refused to turn on the heat in his solitary confinement cell. So after the winter of 2002, when he was afraid of freezing to death, he said, "What do I have to lose? I'm either going to freeze to death or starve to death, but I need to get the heat turned on." And when he was on that hunger strike, it was an opportunity for him to present a human face for the first time to a nation which had only seen him as this faded passport picture in the way so many Muslim bodies are treated, as that black and white, very faded photo. And so we don't get a sense of their humanity. And at this point, you saw this man wasting away on CBC television, and you heard his voice on CBC radio. He wasn't asking to be released. He was saying, "I have faith that justice will prevail, but I need to survive the number of years it's going to take to get there." And so Hassan and other secret trial detainees went on hunger strikes as long as 150 days. And they helped politicize a movement which had not existed before their hunger strikes, and raised awareness of the fact that Canada, which is seen as this nation that welcomed all these travelers after 9/11 through the musical Come From Away, was actually throwing the travelers who were not white and not privileged behind bars for many weeks, months, and years at a time. By the time 2006 rolled around, a lot of these men had been transferred to a special facility called Guantanamo North in Kingston. And the Canadian cabinet, so at the highest level, the Prime Minister, all the key cabinet members and parliamentarians were constantly meeting because they didn't want these guys to die on their watch, especially before a Supreme Court hearing, which would decide the constitutionality of their detention. And so it got to the point that they actually struck a special parliamentary committee to go and visit these men in prison to hear what their grievances were. So it's a really good example of how your willingness to say, "I'm not going to eat," throws a spanner into the works, because either in a capitalist system or in the microcosm of that inside the jail, your refusal to go along with what is the normal routine of the jail itself, or what the Berrigans and folks at Jonah House talk about being out here in minimum security is, that refusal to go along with the status quo is a very powerful thing, and it makes those in power really scared, because if you're willing to stop eating, perhaps you're willing to stop cooperating on another level. Ultimately, for those who've never done it, or for those who can join it, let's say for a day as part of a chain fast. We've had a lot of chain fasts in solidarity with refugees that have gone on for months, where you fast for a day and then pass it on to someone else. And as a faster, you would take that time to reflect, to think about what it is to actually suffer just a little bit, and you take some form of political action and appeal to others to say, "I'm doing this today, and these are the reasons I'm doing it." And for me, fasting is a lot like long distance walks. They tend to slow us down. And when we slow down, I think it allows us to see and feel things more clearly. And when we open ourselves up to that, I think, especially those of us with relative privilege, we are able to connect with the suffering and the hungering that is experienced by so many billions of people on the planet on a daily basis. So I look forward to participating in this fast around ending Canadian militarism and global militarism as well. And I really thank the organizers of this event for all your work in putting it together.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matthew, for your presentation and for sharing such powerful resistance history with us, and also for making the profound connection to bodily autonomy. I'm looking very, very forward to hearing more from you in the Q&A. And I also just want to remind folks at home that you can put your questions in the Q&A box as the event proceeds, and we'll get to them towards the end. So thank you, Matthew. Our next speaker is Suhail Benslemen. Suhail is an illegalized and criminalized migrant who is currently living on Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, where he awaits imminent deportation to Morocco. Suhail became involved in abolitionist work as well as prisoner and migrant justice organizing as a member of the Criminalization and Punishment Education Project, a member of the Ottawa Sanctuary Network, and the coordinator of the Jail Accountability and Information Hotline. Through the mutual aid project that he coordinates, Suhail organized with several political and legal public campaigns alongside incarcerated comrades meant to hold institutions of human caging accountable for the harm caused to criminalized peoples and their communities, and to alleviate some of the harm caused by incarceration. Suhail co-authored The Double Punishment of Criminal Inadmissibility for Immigrants in the Journal of Prisoners on prisons, as well as the Jail Accountability and Information Line, Early Reflections on Praxis, which was published in the Journal of Law and Social Policy. Suhail has a forthcoming chapter for the Routledge International Handbook of Penal Abolitionism entitled, Please Shackle Me and Throw Away the Key, How a Shift in Understanding Alienation, Oppression, and Determinism led a docile body to adopt an abolitionist stance. Welcome, Suhail.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that introduction. I want to start my presentation by talking about a personal experience of a hunger strike that I undertook at the Ottawa Carleton Detention Center. I was getting tired of being put in segregation due to some conflicts I had with prisoners sometimes with guards. Just because the prison is an environment that is inherently violent, that breeds violence, and there is no way of practicing any form of, transformative justice within the walls. Hell, there is no ways of practicing it outside of the walls in this carceral society we live in. But I was I was put in Supermax for a few times at the jail, and then I decided that it was enough for me. I don't want to go back to Supermax, and I want to go back to the range or the living unit where I was incarcerated with my fellow prisoners. So I decided to go on a hunger strike. I told the guards that I will be going on a hunger strike. And at that time, my political education wasn't anywhere where I think I am right now. I went on a hunger strike, and what they do to you when you're incarcerated is that if you're by yourself, they take you to a segregation unit. So I was already in segregation, but they took me to like a segregation unit that is a little bit unbearable. The cell that they took me to like had feces like in the wall that didn't clean because folks had like mental, we were in mental distress, and they smeared some of their feces on the walls. And in the crack of the window, when you come close to the door to get your food, you get your food, but there is feces in the window. So it's very like it was very bad situation for me, and I couldn't bear it. And on top of that, at night there is like a vent that stays on all night, that I think they blast to the max or whatnot, but anyways, the vent doesn't let you sleep. There's other folks who are caged as well, forcibly confined, who are like screaming at night and stuff like that, because people don't receive the care that they deserve inside. There's no institutions of human caging are not therapeutic institutions. They are not made to care for human beings. Therefore, people are in distress. So those folks too don't let you sleep at night. The guards, they have to come to do checkups on you they say every 20 minutes or so for medical reasons, but really it's just another form of torture. Like they open a hatch, close it every 20 minutes, a metal hatch opening and closing. I couldn't take it more than 2 or 3 days, and I decided, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna stop my protest, and I want to go back. Whatever you take me, let me go back to to like a regular cell where I'm not put under these conditions. So I just want to like give folks a little bit idea of like sometimes how like hunger strikes on the inside look like, and also like highlight that there's some parallels between institutions of human caging and the wider context of the context outside of the prison walls, as in the world is not designed for us to survive and thrive and live in it, and that's how institutions are also designed, but just in a more kind of in your face way that weighs heavily sometimes on your shoulder, because you can't get out of your house and go take a walk while you're incarcerated. But the violence within the walls is real, similarly to the violence outside of the walls. And really, when people, like Matthew highlighted a little bit earlier, go on a hunger strike when they're incarcerated, is really for some very, very basic, conditions. Like they're not asking for the government to stop, buying airplanes. You know what I mean? Like they're not even asking for that. They're asking, like if I pull out here from the hunger strike that started on Wednesday, June 3rd, 2020, at the Ottawa Carlton Detention Center, where 14 men identifying people participated in a hunger strike. And they said that they participated in the hunger strike, and I quote from them, because we are in the care of the ministry, and we're supposed to be treated with dignity, respect, and professionalism, yet we're not provided for as humans. We're looked at as animals. The basic necessities of life is food. How can you not provide someone with proper food? They, i.e. staff, administration, go home to eat their own meals and have the ability to choose. We're supposed to be protected by the Constitution, but we're being treated as if we're not human, as a number. You can see that, the ongoing dehumanization of criminalized people, and that's what leads. And like when we look at like prisoner struggles or prisoner strikes or prisoner resistance, it always is, because of the institutions cannot cater to the very basic needs of human beings who are in human cages. And they presented a list of demands that was very simple, to alleviate some of the food discrimination, lack of protein. People who are receiving cultural, spiritual diet wanted those diet to be provided as they were provided pre-COVID, because when COVID started, the conditions at the jail worsened and deteriorated. And, really they were just asking for even just, the reinstitutions of the same meal that they had before COVID, even though those meals were not even up to par or not even nutritious. They wanted TV to be left until 2:30 a.m. because they have TVs in front of their cell that they can look at, but those TVs are being locked, even though they have no courts or no proceedings the next day. They wanted more TV channels. They wanted lotion to be provided to people in 4-ounce containers, and also 4-ounce containers of body wash and antibacterial soap. They wanted access to fruits, vegetables. There's actually a woman who participated in the subsequent strike who wrote a piece called I'll come back to that. But they wanted to as well magazine subscriptions to be allowed to receive magazine subscriptions from the outside, increase outdoor activities in yard, because they have almost no access to outdoor activities. They wanted to have haircuts, or at least the tools necessary to cut your own hair. At the jail, to cut your own hair, you have to pay. I think now the price even went up for the haircuts, but it's around 30 or 20 or $30 for folks who have no incomes, and they have to rely on their families for that. They wanted access to they want to allow access to their own cells during day room activities, to allow them to physically and isolate from people during the pandemic. They wanted to increase the 6-picture limit per envelope, because each envelope has to have a limit of 6 pictures to be sent in. They wanted to stop displaying items on the canteen that are out of stock, because people order items and they look forward to those items to come on like Tuesday. And when the canteen comes, those items are just immediately said that they're out of stock. So increase the number of healthy items on the commissary as well, including oatmeal, decrease or eliminate the processed food from their diets. So we can see that, really when they undertook the hunger strike, the demands that they were asking was pretty straightforward. We supported them from the outside because inside in jails, when you do a hunger strike, like I said, they put you in 24-hour isolation. So people, before they go on a hunger strike, they have to, if there's any political action to be expected from the hunger strike, to be coordinated in advance. You have to get in touch with your loved ones before they go on a hunger strike, to get as much information as you can from them, because as soon as they're going to go on a hunger strike, they're going to be a radio silence, and you're not going to hear from them because they're going to be further, confined. And really, that strike lasted for 31 hours. The ministry accepted, to agreed to some of the demands of the prisoners, but we came to realize later on that that agreement was just a sleight of hand and a tactic to quell the resistance, and brought no meaningful change other than the magazine subscriptions yeah, there were some changes that happened. Like, for example, they were receiving like the peanut butter cups that they were asking for. They got some vegetables, they got some meals replaced, but it was really, it was not, how can I say that? It was not consistent afterwards, because people were still getting sandwiches that are swimming in pickle juice and that are disgusting to eat afterwards. And so people were upset, but there's interesting dynamics that have been raised by the hunger strike, amongst them solidarity messages from other parts of the jail. So from the women's side of the jail, there have been messages that we were able to record and publish. There were indigenous prisoners as well that issued their own list of demands, following in solidarity with the hunger strikers, but to acknowledge that they're facing barriers at the jail to access spiritual, to have their spiritual needs met. So they issued another list of demand that was posted in the update about the hunger strike. We supported them by organizing an email zap and a phone zap to the jail, so people on the outside would contact the jail either by email or by phone. There was even like a member of provincial parliament and an opposition critic who wrote a letter to Sylvia Jones, the Minister of Human Caging in Ontario, and told her that she must meet those demands because they are basically asking for basic necessities. And even the letter from the MPP, who's a member of their own system, didn't get any response, up until today. And following the hunger strike, people were upset and they went on a second hunger strike that lasted 5 days. The second hunger strike was joined by people in different parts of the jail, from what they call protective custody to regular maximum security units, all the units almost in maximum, the women's side as well. And we organized a caravan in a sense to the prison where we protested in front of it. To support the folks inside. But while we were protesting on the outside, there has been, intimidation tactics that were used by the authoritarian carceral regime on the inside. They threatened some people. They actually put some women, because they're the only ones whose windows work, who can see on the outside. They threatened to put them in segregation. They put one of them in a maximum security, so they upped her security classification. They threatened to withhold very serious medication. So folks who are taking methadone or Suboxone as opioid substitution treatment on the inside, which is a prescribed medication by the doctor, they were threatened that their medication will not be issued to them. They lied to them, told them that there's no one in the jail that is undertaking a hunger strike, that they're the only ones, created divisions between their organizing, and the hunger strike in the women's side stopped at first. Then, they used some divisive tactics in the men's side. They told some of the people that, so it worked in a sense for them, because some of the people were asking for other basic things, like one of the gentlemen who was asking for some money from his canteen, from his account, to be released to his wife and children. That person's demands that were not part of the hunger strike, but the jail knew that he had that request going. So they came to him and they're like, yo, we're gonna give you this, but you have to stop striking. If you continue striking, we're not gonna give you. So there's no freedom of expression, really. It's like, you know, authoritarian tactics being used against prisoners just to like quell their dissent. And, you know, and there's no meaningful conversational discussions that happen between them and the staff. Everyone throws the responsibility on another person. The sergeants will throw it on the deputies. The deputies will throw it on the ministry. The ministry won't even answer because they're all operating with impunity. If you can give me a time check, I will.
You still have just a little bit more time.
A little bit more time. Yeah, so they're operating with impunity. You know, prisons have to be abolished because, you know, clearly they don't keep our community safe. We can see it now in the COVID context more than ever, but that harm has always been happening. You know, guards would be going into confined spaces, bringing up the virus in the community, bringing the virus inside the prisons. And, you know, there have been a hunger strike right now in Maplehurst that also lasted for a few days, where prisoners demanded very basic things, you know, like access to PPE, immediate end practice of lockdowns to ensure more time on the range, access to video conferencing for the loved ones to be able to visit, very basic things. But again, you know, the governments are really, you know, if you know, you know, nation states are not bodies of justice. They're actually, you know, vehicles of injustice and violence that must end as well. And you know, I look forward to seeing how this upcoming hunger strike is going to be organized. And but for real though, you know, engaging in such acts of political resistance, of course, is must be applauded because people put their bodies on the line, and for our own education and for our own, you know, for our own education on the outside. But there has to be more. There has to be more than that has to be done, because clearly hunger strikes on their own and with the support that is happening on the outside, it's clearly not enough. And you know, we have to escalate otherwise, because we have no choice. Our loved ones are dying inside.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Souheil. Thank you for sharing your harrowing story with us, and the details of your incarceration and your resistance and the resistance of others to those conditions. It's just such a critical perspective for our audience to hear. And also thank you for your solidarity with the struggle against the fighter jets. So please find out more about the work that Souheil is doing and the work that the organizations are doing that he's involved with. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more from you in the Q&A. Thank you. Our next speaker is Lynn Adamson. Lynn is a longtime activist who has fasted for peace, for human rights, and for climate justice. In 2012, Lynn co-founded Climate Fast, which began with the 12-day fast on Parliament Hill to bring the need for commitment to climate action to MPs and to the public eye. She's also participated in one-day fasts as part of relay fasts for human rights. Lynn's been a mediator and trainer for conflict resolution in Canada and in nonviolence for peace teams in conflict zones. As a lifelong Quaker, Lynn is co-chair of Climate Fast as well, and of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. So what I'm going to share with you today is the story of what a small group of activists were able to do with fasting as our major method of action. We started as a small group of activists in 2012 with a dilemma. Climate change was not being talked about on the media or in Parliament. It was the time of Harper as Prime Minister in a majority Parliament. The next election would not be till 2015. What could we do? We needed to get the parties to make platform commitments to act on climate. Many groups had been lobbying for years through the Climate Action Network, yet we were not making sufficient progress, and a grassroots campaign was needed. At our June 2012 meeting, our Bangladeshi member Duan said Gandhi fasted, and if Gandhi could fast, then we can fast. So 3 months later, we were on Parliament Hill. This is going to make it a little smaller. More of it might be seen. There we go. So we fasted from the International Day of Peace, September 21st, to the International Day of Nonviolence, October 2nd, and that was 12 days. So what was important about this? The timing was important. The dates were significant. Parliament was in session. The international climate movement was growing. We needed leadership from Canada, and we needed broad public support of the understanding for need for action. So there were a lot of needs that went into our thinking. People are important. Who can you involve and support? There are many different roles, and all do not have to commit to fasting. Media, outreach, filming, and organizing vigils and events all require a lot of people. We built support from other organizations and prominent individuals like David Suzuki and Bill McKibben. Citizens for Public Justice welcomed us to the Hill. We were hosted in people's homes, and the wonderful Francis Devereux supplied us with thermoses of hot tea and warm encouragement. And I will say, Betty Muir supplied me with many of these photos for today, and this is Vincent Pang, who also filmed us on the Hill. So Indigenous Solidarity, we were very fortunate to have great support from the Algonquin and allied nations who brought their presence, smudge, music, and dance to build up our energy for this campaign. The asks are important. These were our 3 asks: end fossil fuel subsidies, put a price on carbon, and support the development of a renewable energy plan for Canada. We knew that the parties could not really do anything in Parliament because of the majority Conservative government, but individual MPs could pledge to work within their parties to press for those 3 asks. You notice we didn't put a no pipeline ask because we wouldn't have gotten many signatures, if any at all. So we put what we could achieve. And we knew that if these 3 asks were implemented, the demand for oil and gas would decline and expansion of fossil fuels would not be justified. So we were doing in our campaign what we could do, and other campaigns against pipelines and other aspects of oil and gas continued. So visibility is important. So we actually came down off the hill and onto Wellington Street, and we came out in all kinds of weather. Now the MPs had to walk past us to get into Parliament. Sorry, let's see if I can get that. Oh, public vigils, yes, visibility. We also did public vigils, both to start and end our presence on the Hill, to get media, to get attention, to be noticed. So this is our pledge board, and the MPs had to walk past us on the Hill with our asks. And I mean, I have to say, I'm amazed that a simple little handwritten sign like that, those are MP signatures. They came by, they agreed with our asks, and that's Nikki Ashton signing. We have some more signings on this place. That's Libby Davies. I think it's Alexander Bulleris. We had Liberal, 2/3 of the Liberals, including Bob Ray, signed. We had NDP and we had Greens. NDP, we had virtually everybody. But on a Wednesday, when caucus meetings are held, a Liberal MP offered to take the pledge into their caucus meeting. And that might have been Joyce Murray, because she was the very first person to sign our pledge. So she took it in there, and we got a lot of MP signatures, plus 14 senators. By being on the Hill for a period of time, we got lobby meetings. As I said, we also had senator signatures. That's a Senator Cowan signing there. Education and outreach is really important too. We used the time there to do public events. So to have speakers, to have films, to get people involved in taking actions, social media actions, and other actions in support. That's Francis Devereux, who was so helpful living in Ottawa. So it helps to have a host where you're going. Most of us were from Toronto. So one of the film screenings we did on the Hill was Do the Math. It's the Bill McKibben movie about the cost of the tar sands and the fact that it's going to blow the carbon budget. to continue doing it there. So a few MPs and I think some staff of senators showed up. But then we found out that the Auditor General's office had somebody there, and they requested a bilingual copy of the film and showed it to all their staff. So you don't know exactly what the impact of your actions will be, but it can be significant. So as I mentioned, we had 50 groups, sorry, so get this one up here, solidarity in what we were doing, and major statements of support. Some of the organizations would help us by sending out our alerts or putting them on their social media, which was great. We kept people up to date, what was happening on the campaign. So this was when we had 120 pledges signed, and some folks, a business, a restaurant contributed by putting an ad in the paper when we were going to Parliament Hill. I think it was 2013. And we continued. I think persistence is important. You got to come back, or perseverance, as they say. For 4 years, we came back till we have met our goals. And 2015 was an election year, so we came earlier in the year and got people writing, because MPs will always say, oh, nobody talks to us about the need for climate action. That's what we always hear. You see, nobody says it. So we were trying to change that, and we were trying to get everybody to have the candidates in the next election sign the pledge. So no matter who was elected, there would be, So as I said, we had measurable impact. The asks became official Liberal, NDP, and Green campaign pledges. Carbon pricing has been acted on, and we are still putting pressure on with many other groups around fossil fuel subsidies. There is more support for clean energy and renewables at the federal level, at least. We continued the strategy till we had achieved our goals. And then we turned our attention to the development of Transform TO, a climate action plan for the city of Toronto. Since most of us were in Toronto, and since cities use make most of the carbon emissions, this seemed important. And we haven't used fasting in our campaign there, but we have used pledges. So those are the pledges. We also connected with International Interfaith Fast for the Climate, which started up when Yeb Sanyo stopped eating at the climate talks following Haifun Tayan. He said, if we can't pay attention right now to the climate, like I just cannot eat. He was so sick about it. And so the churches started a once a month, first of the month fast. And some people are still continuing that. Climate Fast is generally working in different ways at the moment. And we worked with many other groups to do this work. So it's something that's not for any one person to deal with climate. It's for all of us together to do what we can. So fasting remains a powerful tool in the social justice activist toolbox. When an intense push is needed, when the timing is right, even a small group of dedicated activists can make a difference. Now we got our original, I can stop share. Oops. Okay, we got our original inspiration for fasting from Gandhi, and many groups in India use this strategy in their campaigns. So I'd like to introduce my friend Jill Carr-Harris, who works with Ekta Parashad and with the Jai Jagat campaign, and she will briefly mention how fasting has been used successfully in campaigns in India. Jill.
Hello, everyone. Jai Jagat. I'm grateful to Lynn just to have a few minutes to share a little bit about the work we do in a Gandhian movement in India, particularly in relation to fasting. I want to ask you if you remember there was a very famous fast and struggle called the Platjamata struggle in Kerala, which the Council of Canadians was very much involved with. It was a struggle over water, and it was a Coca-Cola plant that actually polluted the water systems, and people were getting very sick. And one of the fasts that occurred there, which was really one of the great historical fasts in India, was over 5 years, the local women, every 24 hours, a new team came and sat in front of that Coca-Cola plant. And you would be surprised to know that after 5 years, Coca-Cola, who no longer got any customers, wound up their plant, and that plant still stands empty today. They still can't come back and get their materials because they've never paid for the damages that they caused. In 2006, I want to tell you about a fast I was involved with, and this was with women on the housing and land issue. It was called My House, My Land. And over 140 days, every week, a new village would come and sit in front of Parliament on a rotational fast. And in fact, after 20 weeks, the Chief Secretary and the Chief Minister came out and they listened to the women, and later there became a law called My House, My Land. So it was effective. I just want to say that in India, we either plan one-day fast with a lot of people, or if we have a few people, we plan it over a long period of time. In some cases, we even have what we call without water fast. That is when you ask people to go into a deep meditative state, something that is deeply spiritual, where you have absolutely no intake of anything. And this, of course, is meant for having a bigger effect on resistant forces as well. And I would just like to conclude, since I know Suhail, Kathy, Matthew, and Lynn are all in the planning stages for fasting in April, and of course the new fighter jet campaign, which Rachel, Bianca, and Greta are doing. I was wondering if, in fact, we could think in terms not only of this campaign, but linking it as a one-year campaign where every day someone fasts in one part of the world to link us together, not only, as Matthew said, for the particular militaristic issue in Canada, but to show global solidarity against militarism. So with that, I thank everybody, and thank you, Lynn, for sharing your time, and wish you all a Jai Jagat. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Lynn. It's really great to hear from both of you. And thank you for just so generously sharing the details of your actions. It's really also quite inspiring to hear about your victories, so many lessons for all of us. Our next speaker is Kathy Kelly. Kathy Kelly is a peace activist, pacifist, and an author. She helped found and coordinate Voices campaigns, which worked for 25 years to end US military and economic warfare. From 1998 to 2001, Voices activists held 30-day fasts annually at the UN, calling for an end to economic sanctions against Iraq. They also fasted in Baghdad and Geneva, calling on officials to stop starving Iraqi children. More recently, Kelly and others fasted in New York for 1 week, raising the alarm over impending famine in Yemen and calling for an end to US complicity with the war against Yemen. With Witness Against Torture, she's joined an annual week-long fast for the past decade, calling for the closure of Guantanamo. As part of a peace team working in several countries, she's lived alongside people in the invasion and bombing in Iraq, Afghanistan, Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, and Bosnia. Kelly's been imprisoned in US federal prison 3 times for non-violent protest. Welcome, Kelly.
Well, thank you.
Rather, my bad.
Thank you, Bianca. And thank you to the organizers of this call and to each of the people who has already spoken. You've certainly summoned forth a recognition for the great need that we have to, in a sense, drop out from cooperation with the status quo that allows the abuses that Suhail has pointed out to us through human caging. And certainly, you know, there's no way that we can even have a rational discussion of dealing with the carceral state and climate catastrophe and the other problems we face if we don't first figure out how to dismantle the militarism which so plagues our societies. You know, 30 years ago today, and I realize that for those of you who are younger, this was before you were born, but 30 years ago, the country of Iraq had been invaded by my country, the United States, and I'm speaking to you from land that was stolen from the Potawatomi Native peoples. But the United States has engaged in an enormously long war against Iraq. And at a certain point, the Iraqis, young conscripts, were trying to turn themselves in, were trying to retreat. And United States forces with the air attacks said it was like shooting fish in a barrel. It was like a turkey shoot, gunning down those young Iraqis, and some of them were buried alive. Now that's criminal behavior. And I don't believe in human caging. I'm glad to hear Suhail say that human caging is wrong. I don't believe in it. But I do want to see people rehabilitated. And so in our fasting, in our longing, in our intense desire to see a different world, I think we also acknowledge that there are people who have no choice but to be hungry, who don't have a choice to feed their children. I think about people that are being starved in Yemen, especially children today. I do think that there's no one way. There's no law that says this is how you must do a fast or engage in a hunger strike. In fact, I think that resilience is really important, that it's important not to be so focused on one particular goal that we might miss things that get achieved that we didn't expect. And I really want to emphasize that. I've always found it easiest to fast as part of a community. In fact, I like the idea of having a retreat ahead of time and inviting people to come together and get to know one another. But there are people who say, I'm just going to do this on my own. And I think that's certainly valuable, or what Jill has described is valuable. But I want to especially point out a woman from the United States. Her name is Diane Wilson. She's a shrimper, a fourth generation shrimper from Texas. And she's done fasts on her own, even as long as 56 days. And she especially emphasizes this idea that you don't always know what the result is going to be. Maybe I could just give you an example. We, recognizing that Iraqi children were being punished to death during the time of economic sanctions, we held 30-day fasts across from the United States mission to the UN in New York. And then once a week, we'd bring a meal, a full meal of lentils and rice over to those steps to the mission. And we'd say, we'll break our fast if you'll come down and speak with us and listen to what we've seen and heard in the pediatrics wards in Iraq, where it was like a death row for infants. And no one ever came down. We were always arrested, and then we'd be jailed for 3 or 4 days. And we had so many court cases racked up. It wasn't possible to keep up with them all. But a man named Dennis Halliday was the United Nations humanitarian coordinator in Iraq. And one day he literally almost tripped over us where we were sitting on milk crates across from the US mission at an intersection. The next year, Dennis Halliday, whom we so admired, and we were so excited because we heard that he said a good word about us to a doorman one day. The next year, he was sitting with us on the milk crates, had resigned his position and joined us in that fast. One time we were with the Witness Against Torture fasting in Washington, D.C., as we've done every year now since 2008. And we found out that a group of youngsters, Afghans, teenagers, were in a pup tent on a mountainside during the harsh, cold winter in Bamyan, Afghanistan, and they were fasting with us. And we were able to connect with them by cell phone. And then eventually some of us went to visit them, and that has developed a relationship that has persisted for many years, really a very wonderful relationship. I want to also mention, think big and out of the box, maybe an electricity fast, maybe a fossil fuels fast at some point would be appropriate for your community. But I think whatever fasting can do to help us practice simplicity, knowing that so many live in overconsumptive patterns in our society that allows military dominance and laws to protect militarism. If we can practice simplicity, share our resources more radically, and catch the courage from one another so that we won't be frightened by threats, even threats of death, then I think we build the community that can create a world wherein it's easier to be good. I certainly look forward to joining the Canadian Fast. I know that I'm speaking to you from the country that has driven the world into a terrible situation wherein, maybe they used to make weapons to fight wars, but now we make wars to sell weapons. So let's put an end to that. Let's lay aside the futility of war and catch courage from one another. Courage being the ability to control our fears. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy, for the inspiration to catch courage. I love that. I love the inspiration for us to think big. Also, thank you for your cross-border solidarity. I am now going to transition into the next presentation, which is from Tamara Lawrence, a longtime peace activist. Tamara is a member of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. She's also a fellow of the Canadian Foreign Policy, and she's going to give us just a little bit more background about why we came together today to learn about fasting as a strategy for resistance.
Hello everyone, my name is Tamara Lawrence. I'm a member of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace and a member of the No New Fighter Jets campaign. And I'm here to share a few words with you to encourage you to help us stop the Trudeau government from buying new fighter jets. 2 years ago, the federal government launched a $19 billion competition for 88 new fighter jets. This defense procurement is the second most expensive procurement in Canadian history. Last July, the weapons manufacturers submitted their bids. In the running are 3 combat aircraft, Boeing Super Hornet, Saab's Gripen, and Lockheed Martin's F-35 stealth fighters. This year, the federal government is evaluating those bids, and sometime early next year, the government is going to pick the winning bid. So we have less than a year to put enough pressure on the Liberal government to stop this purchase. Now, you might think that we can't do it, but we can. In fact, 9 years ago, the previous Conservative government under Stephen Harper, it almost signed a sole source contract for 65 F-35s, but peace activists across the country, we mobilized and we raised such a stink about these rotten planes that the government couldn't buy them. And we can do the same this time. We can force the Liberal government to delay or cancel this procurement. Now, Trudeau says that we need new fighter jets to meet our NATO and our NORAD commitments and to make our country more secure. But we know that fighter jets don't bring about real security. They foment conflict and they pad the pockets of wealthy weapons manufacturers. Fighter jets are for bombing things and for killing people. We can't let the government spend our precious tax dollars on carbon-intensive combat aircraft that harm people and the planet. Our No New Fighter Jets campaign recently released a report that estimated that the full life cycle costs will be upwards of $77 billion, not $19 billion that the government says. And that cost doesn't even include all of the social and environmental costs of fighter jets. We are in a global pandemic and in a climate emergency, compounded by a poverty crisis, a homelessness crisis, and an opioid crisis. We have First Nations communities across the country that don't have safe drinking water and have inadequate housing and health care. We simply need to stop the purchase of new fighter jets. We need your help. We need to put more pressure on the politicians and we need to raise more public awareness about this issue. And one of the ways that we can do this is a fast for peace. With the ideas and the inspiration of this webinar, I hope that you will take action. Once we announce the dates, we hope that you will do a fast or a meditation or a walk or a candlelight ceremony or something creative. But please be sure to also contact your member of parliament, your senator, and the Prime Minister, and tell them you do not want Canada to buy new fighter jets. Finally, I would like to give a shout out to Brendan Martin of the World Beyond War British Columbia chapter to thank him for his brilliant idea of doing this fast for peace. I'd also like to encourage you all to follow us on Twitter and to like us on Facebook. And I'd like to leave you with a quote by the great American historian and activist Howard Zinn. He said, "There's no act too small, no act too bold. The history of social change is the history of millions of actions, small and large, coming together at critical points to create a power that governments can't suppress. Now is the critical point for us. Please join us in this campaign to stop the Canadian government from buying new fighter jets." Thank you.
So that was a video message from the always brilliant Tamara Lawrence, urging us all to take action. I'm going to pass the mic back to Rachel from World Beyond War for a moment for a word about this struggle that has inspired us to hold this learning event.
Thanks, Bianca, and please do also write your questions in the chat now, because we will be going back to the Q&A after. As Tamara highlighted, we're opposed to bomber jets because we know they'll do the same thing the last batch did. We know their purpose is to carry bombs and drop missiles that will kill civilians, especially children, destroy infrastructure, destroy the environment through their absurd fossil usage. This time they'll have the added and terrifying capacity to carry nuclear weapons. So on one level, this is about the specific Canadian military purchase, but this campaign and our complete determination to stop Canada from purchasing these 88 warplanes is about a bigger picture. It's really about us rejecting what the next several decades of militarism is going to look like, not just here in Canada, but all around the world where they intend to actually drop these bombs and kill people. It's about us refusing to recognize borders as a way of designating who has the right to live safely in their home and who doesn't. As we discussed today, we know the violence of caging humans is wrong, just as we know the violence of bombing people trapped on the other side of the world in their communities is wrong. These issues are connected, and here where we are, for those of us in Canada, this is one thing that we can do that is not small, that will actually stop 88 new planes from being out in the world. We're trying to demand a new normal, a new idea of how we want our country to be in the world. And the very bare minimum is that we need to stop bombing people around the world in other countries. So it is my great pleasure on behalf of the No Fighter Jets Coalition to announce that we will be holding a fast to stop the fighter jets on April 10th of this year, in just a few months. The timing lines up with interfering with the next step in the government process to pick a bidder. We want to stop them before they sign a contract, before they have decided which company they would like to build these terrible planes. So what does this mean, a fast on April 10th? Partially, that's up to all of us, and I'll get to that in a second, but it means that people all across Canada will be fasting. As Tamara mentioned, those who can't fast will be invited to participate in a variety of other ways, and we'll be gathering in person in our cities, of course, safely in line with where the state of the pandemic is at. We'll be fasting in front of the seats of power in our local towns and communities and cities. We'll be holding candlelight vigils at night to walk through and make sure everyone understands that this is about honoring life, and this is about recognizing people who have already died through the current generation of these bomber planes, and that we refuse to allow that to continue. And after the Q&A, there will be a chance for all of us to contribute to this vision of what this fast will look like. But I don't want to jump ahead. I do want to follow up on one more thing Tamara said, which is The No Fighter Jets Coalition has just launched a brand new website, nofighterjets.ca. That is the best place to get all of the information about the report that we just launched 2 days ago, about how you can take action. And that's where we'll also publicly launch information about the fast. You're the first to hear about it on this event today, but there will be more information to follow. And on social media, we're also at No Fighter Jets. And I'll pass it back over to you, Bianca.
Thank you, Rachel, for that exciting announcement. You all heard it here first. So we're now transitioning into the Q&A. Thanks again to our brilliant panelists. I feel very privileged, very lucky to be here in this space with you and have just learned so much. And I'm feeling quite inspired and quite grounded in history and in these current day struggles. So I would like to request that if anyone has any questions, they put them in the Q&A or in the regular chat box. We don't have very many questions, which is actually okay because we are a little bit over time. And so we're going to try and keep this session a little bit short. But if you do have questions, please do post them. So I'm seeing a few. The first question is, how do we connect abolition movements or defund movements around prison, around military, and around police? So I'm gonna direct this at all the panelists. Yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
It's a great question that I've been thinking about a lot. I'm rereading actually Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, and the new edition of The New Jim Crow talks about the integration of all of those issues, the way in which the carceral system is related to the weapons industry, which produces the tools of surveillance that produce the individuals who are then criminalized and then put into the carceral system. And I think one way of doing this is to focus on those companies that profit the most from it. There's a company in Burlington, Ontario that currently makes and has for the past 25 years key monitoring and surveillance equipment for the Predator drones, which are used against the people of Afghanistan and Iraq and Somalia and around the globe. They also produce the same imaging equipment, which is used with heat sensors to fly over Black Lives Matter demonstrations in Los Angeles and Philadelphia and New York. They also produce a lot of equipment that's used in prisons as well. So there is that link that corporations have already acknowledged. And I think the more that we can focus in on one specific target, for lack of a better term, in terms of saying the way to transform society is to no longer make it profitable for all of these institutions to make money off of the criminalization and the imprisonment and caging of human beings.
Thank you, Matthew. Would anyone else like to respond?
Can you please repeat the question?
Yes, so the question is, how do we connect abolition movements or defund movements around prison, around military, around police?
I can try. So, I mean, like, abolition is about the abolition of violence in all its forms. I think any system of violence or vehicle of violence must be abolished. And, when we're talking about defunding the police, is not merely about like moving funds that have been obtained through capitalist, exploitation and colonialism in the first place anyways. So the defund the police movement must be placed within, a wider abolitionist strategy or history that is, like some, Black abolitionists and Indigenous abolitionists show us that it is in fact about the abolition of the nation state. So, abolishing the nation state in a sense, and all its apparatuses of coercion, whether it be the militarization, production and, selling of weapons and otherwise. So I think abolitionist movements and anti-war movements are linked. And also thinking about the ways in which we do the revolution. In a sense, and we see the failures maybe of past efforts to do so, due to the coercive, or the violent nature of them. But maybe, violence sometimes is a tool of resistance. But if we're working towards like abolitionist futures, we must abolish weaponry. We must abolish all those things that can, create, some very abhorrent and violence in the community. So if we don't abolish capitalism and we don't, we don't effectively engage in like creating a safe world for everyone, we're gonna see like a lot of failures like past movements have encountered. So I'm not sure if I answered.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you. If there's anyone else that would like to add to that, please go ahead. If not, we have a few more questions. We have a question here from Simmer. Oh, Matthew.
I was just going to actually ask if Kathy would be, Kathy Kelly, if you would be willing to share some reflections on this question, because you've written beautifully about this, having been in prison for resisting wars and militarism and making those connections to racism and the racialization of the prison population.
Well, thank you, Matt. I suppose one thing I'd want to say is that I guess I've been arrested, I don't know, maybe 80 times in 3 federal prison stints. I don't know where they keep the bad sisters. I never met them. I met women who could have been my coworkers, my next door neighbors, my in-laws, and I lived in a world of imprisoned beauty. The wrongfulness, the utter wrongheadedness of putting people, well, I want to use Souheil's line, human caging, and turning other human beings into being the ones who maintain the caging. That's so wrong. And the length of sentencing is so wrong. And again, I want to emphasize what are and so many of you have said this, so forgive me for being repetitive, but what is it that really threatens our security in the world today? Is it somebody who crossed a border trying to flee from a war? Is it somebody who maybe engaged in a nonviolent transaction with some substance that's really maybe not that different from others who, I mean, my Irish ancestors, I'm sure, were producing bootleg, and during Prohibition times, they weren't sentenced to prison for 10 years. So the racism of this system is, it's manifest horribly, but the real criminal acts that threaten our security are being conducted inside of the parlors and the salons of governance and major corporations. And we ought not forget that. I don't want anybody to go to prison, but I do want people to become rehabilitated. And that means speaking truth about power and speaking truth to power and putting our lives on the line to do it, putting our lives on the line to do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. So the last question that we're going to take for today is, the question is, Matt Behrens said we have to make it so that companies are profiting from war can no longer do so. But under a capitalist neoliberal regime, we are experiencing what Kathy Kelly said, that governments go to war in order to sell weapons. So how do we fight that?
Great question. And I think we have lots of examples of nonviolent actions and campaigns around the world that have confronted the makers of nuclear weapons. Here in Canada at Litton Industries in the 1980s, over a decade, thousands of people went to jail, were arrested, and put it in, and the campaign was successful, not so much in stopping the cruise missile, but Litton never again bid on a nuclear weapons contract. During the war against the people of Iraq, hundreds of millions of bullets were being manufactured in Quebec by SNC-Lavalin. So Homes Not Bombs and No One Is Illegal and a number of other campaigns actually put a divestment campaign together to say you must divest yourself of your military arm. And it only took us a year, but even going to stockholder meetings, protesting outside of government offices, and doing civil disobedience at SNC-Lavalin offices itself. Within a year, they thought that the publicity was just too much because we had made the connection between the suffering that they profit off of and the fact that they were going to lose business because of the exposure. So it is something that we can still do. It's not necessarily always going to work, but I like what Kathy talked about earlier. It kind of goes back to that old Quaker notion of we're not always called to be successful, we're called to be faithful. And the faithfulness that we exhibit might not work in the specific thing that we're doing, but it might plant seeds of justice somewhere else that's going to very pleasantly surprise us somewhere down the road.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Matthew. Does anyone else want to jump in?
Well, just to say, let's all do what we can now to promote April 10th. Let's get it on everybody's calendars.
So everybody, please do mark your calendars. I think it's about time now for us to move forward. It's been such a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much to our brilliant panelists. I'm going to pass the mic back to Rachel, who's going to close off this part of the afternoon session and let you know what we've got ahead.